grape that is unique compared to Burgundy or unique compared to California. Oregon Chardonnay tends to have a lot of lemon and citrus, white flowers like citrus blossom. And I wanted to make something that was kind of like an Oregon Chardonnay, but with the volume turned up on it. So I blend in 30% Sauvignon Blanc and a little bit, like about 10% of Melon de Bourgogne. So those grapes to me have attributes that are present in Chardonnay, but at kind of quieter volumes, and I wanted to boost the tropicality of it through the Sauv Blanc and the kind of chalkiness and white floralness through the Melon. And so that's what I did. So this is all neutral French oak fermented. The barrels are all around 6 to 8 years old, so they're not imparting woodiness, but they're a good vessel for fermentation and for a little bit of evolution of the wine. Dazzles of Light is referencing the light that comes through a forest canopy when you're out hiking, and I use a little bit of the proceeds from this wine to help with old growth forest preservation in Oregon. So I like to give back a little bit to causes that matter to me, and environmental causes is something that I'm always thinking about. So eight months in neutral French oak and then compiled in stainless steel. This wine did go fully through malolactic fermentation, so you're probably picking up on a little bit of a whiter kind of mouthfeel to it. But the Sauv Blanc in particular has a lot of acid also, so it kind of zips up in the finish. Yes. Johann Vineyards. So that's a vineyard that I have been working with for a long time for Pinot Noir, and I get it from Johann. So there's not much of it being grown. Yeah.
You might see Melon from Irie. They have a bottling, David Lett, or Jason Lett. I talked to him about it, and he said they got it on accident. They thought it was Chardonnay, and it was planted, and then they realized a couple years in, his dad realized a couple years in that it was actually melon, and they kept it. But it's one of those things that's fun quirk of fate.
Yep. Yeah. I worked at Irie early on in my career, and some of these wines were kind of through Irie exposure. We'll be tasting a Pinot Meunier that was definitely because of that. So, yes.
You work with a lot of unconventional, I guess you could say, grapes that are not from the area. Do you find that is something that is also got to do with climate change, and that it's helping with climate changes, so that you get to work with this palette of all different types of grapes?
That has been a reason for working with a lot of these grape varieties, looking outside of varieties that are so sensitive to heat. So I have started working more with Italian grape varieties, particularly from Southern Oregon. And it is partially because of a reaction to wanting to make, looking forward, making grapes that will hopefully be able to withstand the heat a little bit better, and also because of interest, So we were talking about Zabibo earlier, and I have some growers in Southern Oregon that have asked me, like, what would I like to work with? And so had one grower that planted Zabibo for me, which is a type of muscat. It's Muscat of Alexandria, but in Sicily they call it Zabibo, and that's kind of way more fun to say, so that's what I lean into. I have another grower that planted Nero d'Avola for me in Southern Oregon, and I work with Vermentino from down there. I love Italian wines. I fell in love with wine in Italy as a teenager, and full circle moment, I'm also starting an Italian project in Piedmont, and so I'm trying to get Oregon experience with these grape varieties before working on them in another country with people that are from there that have been working with these grape varieties forever. So, yeah, there's multiple reasons.
The soil types down in Applegate are different than in Willamette.
Yes.
Do you find that is something also that changes your perspective when you're making these wines?
I mean, our soils are what they are, you know. I think it's interesting to find out what these grape varieties do on the particular soils that they're grown on, but they're not, they're, you know, they're set in stone as to what they are. And to me, I'm more of curious about, well, what is it like from this site than matching a grape variety to a similar soil type from somewhere else in the world, because Oregon soils are not the same as France, for example. I mean, we have a much younger soil composition for the most part, a lot of volcanic soils, some marine sediment, but we don't have things like limestone. There's very little granite in Oregon. So I look at things more of an adventure and a curiosity than trying to replicate what's happening somewhere else, you know? Because it isn't the same as anywhere else. It is just itself, and that's fun, you know? Yeah, if that makes sense.
On the dazzles, just a note before we move on to the next two. Standing at a weekend at Binny's, people coming up, do you have a white? To me, that wine has been really useful because it's the really, really big net that catches everybody. Oh, I don't like Chardonnay. Cool, I've got Sauvignon Blanc. It's got some Chardonnay in it, but we're using the acid to make it zippy. I love Chardonnay. All right, this is Oregon Chardonnay. You're leading people to water in a very honest way that allows them to explore something that answers that question where 9 times out of 10 when I'm asked that in store, it's somebody who doesn't have a really broad experience with the wealth of what Oregon can do. They had one wine made in one style. So here it's just a way to think about, I take cues from people and lead them in one direction, and it works. It's neat. I love it because now you have somebody thinking about this, and maybe we can have a conversation if they're interested and they come back about what melon is. And all of a sudden now I've got somebody in my aisle that I can take over and talk about Joe Landrone, forgive the plug, but his wines are delicious, right? That's Melon de Bourgogne from Muscadet. And so you can pull back and forth. There's another parallel just for the global situation that you mentioned. This Chardonnay Sauvignon Blanc is something you see a lot in Cheverny in the Loire Valley. So you probably have some on the shelf. There again, super fun thing, get somebody to go home with 2 wines, one from France, one from Oregon. It's very different, but that's what wine is, right? That exploration. So different ways to get people into this. I'll let you talk about lemonade this time.
Okay, so lemonade is the next wine, and that wine is 2024 vintage. It's 100% Pinot Noir from the Willamette Valley, and I'm working with growers that are higher elevation sites. We are intending it as rosé from the moment it starts blooming, so cropped at levels that are appropriate for rosé, picked a little bit earlier than I would if it was intended for a red wine, and then direct pressed and fermented in stainless steel. So the color that it has is really just the color that the juice picks up from the skins on their way out of the skins. I don't do any maceration or anything like that. The juice is compiled from the vineyard sites that I work with, and in 2024 it was 4 vineyard sites. This year, 2025, it's going to be 3 vineyard sites. But they're all kind of on the northern part of the Willamette Valley. And fermented in stainless steel. I end up racking the juice about 5 or 6 times through fermentation, and that's when you move juice off the lees. As fermentation is happening and yeasts are going through the process of converting sugar, they are like dying off and creating yeast lees. And I like to move the wine off the lees periodically throughout fermentation because Pinot Noir rosé tends to get a little reductive. A reduction is a byproduct of fermentation, and it's when wines, if you ever open a bottle of wine and they smell a little bit eggy or a little bit farty or something, that's reduction, and I don't want that in my lemonade. I want like a very clean, pretty version. I also don't want them to be like leesy. I don't want lemonade to be a yogurty, leesy kind of wine either. I want it to be like a really clean, pretty version of Pinot. So I move it off of the lees periodically throughout fermentation as needed, and it's fascinating. I get super fascinated by lees. You can have like 1.5 feet of them in the bottom of a tank, and they have the consistency of like paint, like really gloppy, like painty. It's really fascinating. So for me, if you're a winemaker, you get stoked about weird things. But and then after it's done with fermentation, it's filtered, bottled pretty quickly after harvest. So bottled in January, and then that's it in a nutshell. But this is a really fun time of year to see how people are feeling about lemonade, because it's a time of year where I can make kind of changes before harvest and increase production or find more fruits. So I always like to try to really gauge how it's doing in the market and what people's interest is, if I need to make more, because this is the opportunity to make those choices. So that's kind of a goal. Make more.
So to reiterate here, to Brianne's point, like, it is amazing, right? 450 times faster than the 23. There's a lot of people coming in and getting it. Obviously, the label design work that Brianne did helps a ton. I have also answered the question that I'm sure all of you had. No, there's no lemons. It is not actually lemonade. Getting past and just being able to give a glimmer of the deeper story is so useful, and then you're hooked, right? Then people are in. I would love to ask someone, you all here, who has a sales hook for this? Because you all are selling it. I'm sure a lot of you have had staff picks on it. What do you do?
I first ask people if they want something really light and summery, in which case I get a Provençal or something like that. But I say if you want something with more body, a little more oomph in terms of the flavor, I tell them grab a rosé made from Pinot Noir, and there's a few great options that we have. Obviously, lemonade's one of them.
Cool.
And that usually hooks people.
Yeah.
And then once they get it once, they tend to buy it pretty often from there on out.
Yeah. Yeah. Love that. A little bit more Venice, a little bit more like the heart of a wine, and something that people can wrap their heads around once they get it.
Yeah, basically a rosé that isn't watery, if you will.
Yep. Yep.
So it goes over very well.
Love it.
That's great.
I mean, for us to sell it, it's telling that story, you know, it's like everything was essentially going to hell in 2020, and you made something fantastic out of the lemons that life was giving you.
Oh, thank
I feel
you.
like that part of the story always really hooks people in our store.
Oh, that's nice to hear. Thank you.
A lot of people can relate to that story.
Yeah, well, 2020 was a year that handed out lemons all over the place. So that was a part of naming it that as well, that it was just being, you know, all of us were pretty overwhelmed by that. So, yeah.
I was going to say, usually what I say is I get customers who want a Pinot Noir rosé. They don't want to pay the prices of Sancerre. I'll bring them the lemonade, and I'll usually start by saying, I normally don't go for domestic rosés. I'm a Francophile, but this absolutely like punches above its weight class as far as
Nice.
flavor profile goes, how clean it is, and the price point. That's
Awesome.
usually what I say.
Well, thank you. That's great.
One of the things you'll see if you do a deep dive into Brianne's history is that somewhere early on in the podcast she said, most of my distributors have mostly European books.
They do. Yeah. Well, I think I'm one of 2 organ producers in your book still. So, yeah. Yeah, thanks.
Stephen, would you mind starting with the 2 reds? Cool. And then brand new, so a crowd that has been very familiar with the first 3. Now, likely, unless they've been out drinking at bars, they haven't seen Vendées Orange. So some of you probably have, but Vendées Orange, which is just brand newly active in the system.
Great. It is, so this is Gewürztraminer, Riesling, Pinot Gris, and Müller-Thurgau. So some of the same fruit that goes into Vendée Blanc, but this is with full skin maceration throughout fermentation. So I take those 4 varieties, destem them, and ferment them as if they were a red wine. and do punch downs on them and all of the same kind of stuff that I would do in a red fermenter. And then right before the yeast get to total dryness, I rack it off and press the skins and let it finish in barrel, because I'm trying to make an orange wine that's still juicy and fresh and approachable and pairable with food. And I find that a lot of orange wines, when they have real extended skin contact, can come across very, very drying, and they're hard to pair with. So I'm genuinely always thinking about, what am I going to eat with this when I'm making a wine, and softening it out through minimizing the astringency and tannin is a goal for me.
Sorry, what is this called?
Vendée L'Orange.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
not on here. Thank you.
It's not on there?
No.
Okay. It's 2024.
Okay.
I really didn't want to give you any information at all.
Can you repeat what the grapes were in that?
Yeah.
please?
Gewürztraminer, Pinot Gris, Riesling, and Müller-Thurgau. So Gewürztraminer and Pinot Gris are really what are contributing the color. Both of those grapes have color in their skins. Gewürztraminer is kind of a pinky colored grape, and Pinot Gris is like a dusty purple color. So those two grape varieties, when they're made on skins, come out fairly pink. I usually co-ferment them, so it's kind of a dark pink. And the Riesling and the Müller-Thurgau don't really have much color at all, even on skins. They're kind of like maybe a straw yellow kind of color, and the combination of all of those together make it this like really kind of amber color. When I'm making an orange wine, I like to work with really aromatic grape varieties. I find the process of including skins and oxygen contact and everything can kind of flatten aromas. And so I try to start with really aromatic grape varieties to begin with, so that the final wine still has a lot of character and personality. And then also I find that wines that have a brighter acid really lend themselves to orange wine as well, because they come out juicier and fresher and still kind of drink a little bit like a white wine. Yeah.
Excuse me, determining like which ones will go into the white versus the orange. Are there different harvest times, like for different ripeness levels?
A little bit, yeah. Yes. The Riesling and Müller-Thurgau that go into the Vendée Blanc are typically picked quite a bit less ripe, particularly the Müller-Thurgau. So usually about 2.5 weeks earlier than what goes into the orange. The Pinot Gris, I choose the sites that have the like darkest, fullest version of Pinot Gris, because depending particularly on elevation, Pinot Gris can be a lot darker or a lot lighter in color, and then not just color, tannin, and sometimes alcohol, like sugar. So I am looking for riper versions of those varieties to go into the orange compared to the white.
There was the question on the varietal blends and how she comes to it and why you come to it. One of the things for me, which is the most remarkable about what I've learned from Brianne and what she does for blending, it is very easy and very inexpensive and very safe to have an acid addition. There are wonderful winemakers who do it. It's not the end of the world, but you can add things to wine. Once you start adding things and you go with the mindset of I can add to fix, then you are in a very different place than starting to say, I have what I need in these varieties, but I'm also going to master what these varieties give me. So just to sort of reiterate from the outside, because it's taken me a while to absorb how impressive it is, you're dealing with a recipe that's going to be going in sort of 3 dimensions during harvest. But if you can pick something earlier and you affect the pH, right? There's a lot of very technical ideas and conversations around how these blends happen. But if you get something that's got a little bit more acid, well, that's going to be helping you instead of needing to put in something that would stop bacteria, right? The pH is going to change that. Your wine is going to be more stable. There is a conversation at the heart of natural wine that's always what is natural versus something else. And the thing I've always admired about Brianne is she makes very natural wines, naturally, but also meticulously. It's very intentional that you're getting a clean, bright wine that pops. It's not something that's going to have all sorts of other options going, or all sorts of other things going on. And there's a place and a space for everything. But the thing that's amazing about what you've done consistently is to produce wines that are just delicious and also made without any of that other stuff.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And I mean, I learned a lot from Vendée Blanc was one of the first wines that I kind of did this co-fermenting thing and working on the final chemistries through picking choices and blending. But I've applied that to all the wines at this point, even single vineyard Pinot that we're going to taste the Johann vineyard in a minute here. Those clones of Pinot Noir are picked at varying levels of ripeness so that with the final wine in mind. And I feel like there is a tendency from some winemakers to pick each variety at like the best amount, like if you were making Pinot Blanc by itself, picking it at the optimal time for Pinot Blanc by itself. I always am thinking about it in terms of the final wine, and I blend at harvest. I blend, at juice phase, not like going back and trying different percentages of this and that. I don't really think about the varieties as much as the finished wine, and what the finished, where I'm trying to hit on the alcohol or the acid or whatever in the balance of the finished wine is influencing the picking decisions of the individual varieties. I don't know if that makes sense, what I'm saying exactly, but if I was going to make just one kind of wine out of it, like a Chardonnay or a Pinot Blanc or whatever by itself, I would probably pick them differently than knowing that it's going into a blend like that. Yeah.
It is wonderfully complicated, and it's one where people will have to go out and all have dinner together and spend 3 hours, because the question then becomes, well, what is terroir and what is the winemaker? And the answer is neither exists without the other. And you just need to, in my approach as a distributor, you need to find people who you respect when they're looking at the site to say, you're going to make, I can't wait to see the decisions you make, as opposed to I'm worried about what you're going to do with that closet full of acid in the back. And that's where you are.
Thank you. So the next wines that we're moving into, some reds. The first red is Vendée Rouge, and I believe you all have been working with this, right?
This rolled recently, 21 to 22.
Okay.
And partially within the world of COVID and the craziness and everything, we were on 21 for a while, rolled into 22. Background, we have a couple of months of 22, and then we'll go into 23, so we'll be faster on the roll through. But there was a big difference between 21 and 22 if you all had it. And the response to the 22 indicates that people love the new wine. So,
good.
Which is great. So,
that's great. So this wine, I call it Rouge, as opposed to putting like Pinot Noir on the label, because I always do blend this. It's Pinot blended with something else. And depending on what the vintage is, I have changed up the blender grapes from year to year. So one year I did it with like Cab Franc and Gamay. I've done it with Pinot Gris and Pinot Meunier quite a bit. This vintage is 92% Pinot Noir and 8% Pinot Meunier. And I do feel like the Pinot Meunier shows up in it, even though it's a small percentage. But the consistency of this wine from vintage to vintage is in the production methods. So I do just over 50% whole cluster, and I try to keep the clusters intact throughout fermentation by only doing pump overs. So when red wines are fermenting, they're creating a lot of heat and CO2, and that heat and CO2 is pushing all the skins up to the surface of the fermenter, and a couple of times a day you have to work those skins back into the juice in order to keep bacteria levels down and to keep a healthy ferment going. A traditional way of doing it, and what I do on like my single vineyard Pinot, are punch downs or pigeage, where you're using a tool or you're using your legs to like mix the grapes back in. Another way of wetting the cap and of mixing the grapes back in is called a pump over, and that's when you use a pump to suck juice out of the fermenter and you pump the juice back over the grapes. And I do only pump overs on this wine because I don't want anything to break up the actual grapes through fermentation. There's a kind of fermentation that has gotten, that is known in the Beaujolais region, called carbonic maceration, and that's when the actual fermentation starts happening inside the fruit and then it bursts the skins open, as opposed to happening like in the juice and in the crushed grapes. And that's type of fermentation makes for really fruity wines. And so my goal was to make a kind of Pinot Noir that's really fresh and fruity and a little bit crunchy, as opposed to something that's more evolved and earthy in depth, because it's fun to see both versions, and I wanted something just fresh and fun in this wine. All pump overs, and then after it's dry, I press it off and have about 50% of it in stainless steel for aging, and then about 50% in very old barrels that don't impart any woodiness. And I'm still trying to kind of capture and seal in more the fresh side of it through the stainless steel, and that's the goal with the wine. So carbonic maceration is when you do it the way that they do it in Beaujolais. They literally seal the tanks up and then they pump a bunch of CO2 into it to create an environment that has no oxygen at all in it, and that preserves the fruit. It helps keep bacteria down, but and then you have this ferment happening in this CO2 rich environment. I don't exactly do that. I use about 50% whole cluster, so I put all of the whole fruit at the bottom of the fermenter, and then I destem a bit on top of it, because I have done it completely as carbonic maceration before, and in a natural wine environment, you are open to a lot of bacterial problems in that. And the first vintage that I did it was 2015, and I got a lot of volatility in the wine, and I'm trying to not make wines that have high VA. I destem fruit on top of the whole clusters, because all that juice and stuff forces oxygen off the surface of the grapes and like fills it in, and oxygen is the catalyst for acetobacter, which causes volatile acidity. Yeah.
One of the things on this that I think has made a big difference in terms of communication is that because it's 92% Pinot Noir, you could by law call it Pinot Noir. You don't have to declare that there's anything else in it. Not trying to get around that, but when you're selling it, when somebody comes on the floor and they're looking for Pinot, it is a terrifically priced, lighter style Pinot. So if somebody wants a Pinot but doesn't really want something more serious, if they're going to maybe decant or whatever else, it's an easy way in the door, and I feel like with this vintage that has helped underline that a bit. So
Yeah.
So Brianne was really technical, and I just want to see, does anybody have questions on, is there anything she said that just simply didn't make sense? Because, I mean, I started filming winemakers 20 years ago. I have 700 videos on YouTube. I'm not advertising that. I'm just saying, like, I've spent a lot of time listening to people, and I have questions. So, like, if there's something Brianne says talking about the VA along the way, again, please just raise your hand. If you don't have them now, that's fine, but the questions make it fun. So.
Yes.
The other 8% of this is Pinot Meunier, which opens the door to the newest wine to come in, which is 100 Years a Lady. And I will, as you're talking, I'll grab bottles so people can see it.
Okay. So it's a fun segue here, because that 8% Pinot Meunier, the last wine in your, the second red wine, I'm like, they just got filled. The second red wine is 100 Years a Lady, 2022 vintage also. It's 100% Pinot Meunier. I wanted to showcase that wine on its own. So Pinot Meunier is one of the traditional blending grapes in Champagne, and the majority of Pinot Meunier in the world goes into sparkling wine production. The majority of Pinot Meunier in Oregon goes into sparkling wine production. But like I mentioned, I worked early on in my career at the Irie Vineyards, and they make a red Pinot Meunier, and I was always kind of fascinated by that wine. So I started working with it as a red grape as well. And it's a relative of Pinot Noir, body-wise, and in terms of fruit, there is some overlap with Pinot Noir, but I feel like the structure of it and some of the like earthy, rustic mouthfeel and aromas are really unique to Pinot Meunier. So I always get like a little like a flinty, kind of black, flinty kind of low note and earthiness in Pinot Meunier, and I think that's really, really interesting. The wine that I bottled, thank you, is only the free run juice. So when I have a fermenter full of grapes, there is wine that is really easy to get to that you don't have to access by pressing. You can just pump it out of the fermenter after the fermentation is done. That's considered free run juice. After taking all of that free run juice out of a fermenter, the skins hold a lot of juice in them as well. And so I put those skins into the press and press them off and get more wine out of them, and that's considered press wine. And both wines are, both versions of a wine are good and have attributes that I like in a final product, but in my single varietal wines like Pinot Meunier and my Johan Vineyard Pinot, I'm trying to just use the free run juice because I think that the texture is really, really fine and really, there's a purity to the fruit that I'm trying to showcase in those particular bottlings, and so that's why I choose to use the free run juice. The wine is named for my late grandmother, the year that she turned 100, and I wanted to give her a tribute. So she and her family came out to Oregon during the Depression to pick fruit in the Willamette Valley, and they were farmers, and she was always growing stuff, always had a garden going. She went into labor with my dad, doing her job of picking strawberries, and Pinot Meunier just, to me, it reminded me of my grandma. There's this earthiness, rusticness, combined with this like really pretty fruit, and so it's just, that's my grandma. That's where the name comes from. And yeah, 2022 was the last vintage that she was around. She made it to 102, so she was awesome.
And you said this is 24 vintage?
This is 22.
This is 22?
Yeah.
Sorry, it's also not on the sheet.
Oh. I brought samples out from Oregon, so this just came on a plane with me a few days ago too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The thing that I will always ask any group tasting something for the first time, as you're tasting it, is there something that you would say to somebody to convey what your experience is? Brianne mentioned strawberries. I don't mean to lead you, but is there something that you can latch onto? So if you have one thing, it'll open for me, it always opens a memory door to that. Oh yeah, 100 Years a Lady is blank. I'd love to hear it if you have it. If not, just encourage you to market yourself mentally, because it makes life so easy. And I know you guys have walked through this thing about the wines, the hundreds of wines that you guys have to pull in a single country, much less the whole floor. But just to be able to access it is a real fun trick.
Are you asking like what we're getting on that?
Yeah, what would you say?
Red plum, cassis, herbes de Provence, and earth. That's what I wrote.
Nice.
Yeah.
I like that.
The plum, to me, with the texture of it, the plum skin,
Yep.
like it has a little bit of that plum skin, but also the softness, that makes a lot of sense.
Yep, I agree. Yeah,
Rained on honeysuckle.
Rained on honeysuckle, that's awesome.
I love that.
Yeah. There's a there's something with the rain where it like, it permeates. That, it's like the oil in the honeysuckle with water, I love that, cool.
And that kind of plays on kind of what I was talking about with some of those low, I tend to smell and taste things in color in my head. So when I was talking about like the low black notes that the rain on asphalt, what do you call that? Petrichor. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm talking about a little bit too. So that's cool.
Super cool. This is not in Illinois yet. It was in just in case. We're ordering and we'll get it to you as soon as we can.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Okay.
Sorry, I must have cut my sheet off. It's going to be, what, can I ask you? Where would you all think? Irie retails at 43, and I saw one other on the shelf. But just in terms of tasting and thinking about it, where would you all feel comfortable recommending it to somebody?
I would say 45 is what I was gonna say.
Yeah.
I personally would pay 45 for it, so I
Yeah.
can feel confident in selling it for that price too.
Love
I
that.
think it's even worth more, but with the way the consumers are, I think 45 would be a really good price. Not
What-
to dictate what you sell.
What gives you that impression? How do you arrive?
The quality of this one, the backstory of it, the personal touch on everything that she does. That alone is the story. That alone is your selling point right there.
Yeah.
You know? And so she's so accessible. I'm sure that if any one of our customers wanted to contact you through Instagram, you'd answer them.
Of course. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so there's a lot of connection
Yeah.
that you get instead of big conglomerates that are taking over. Yeah, they might taste good and they might be everywhere else, but if you want something that's quality driven,
Love it. Does anybody hear 45 and think no or yes, just instantly? Like, was anybody somewhere totally different one way or the other?
Can I contribute to this conversation? It sells for 42 on my website, and I try not to undercut my retailers around the country. So I could raise my price on my website. That's an option, but just to keep that in mind. So let me know where we do land, because I don't want to undercut you guys. So I can always make it 46 on my website, but yeah.
No, it can potentially come in below that, and to be determined exactly with Bill on where that lands. But to me, the question of asking is always like, just knowing what to do. Thank you, that's a great answer.
All right, so the next wine is Deep Blue 2022. So this is a blended Pinot Noir. There are 6 vineyards that went into this. I had 13 vineyards that I was working with for Willamette Valley kind of Pinot Noir, and I went through and tasted by vineyard when they all were in barrel. This was not blended at picking like my Vindidays Blanc and my Vindidays L'Orange. This was blended later. I went through and tasted by lot, and I tried to identify the vineyards that I felt had more kind of blue fruit attributes to them, and found that they were all in the western side of the Willamette Valley in the McMinnville and Yamhill Carlton AVAs. So that's pretty much what is composed in this wine is western Willamette Valley. I chose blue fruit just because I think it's a fun part of Pinot Noir to showcase. And I also use some of the proceeds of this wine towards some Pacific Ocean causes. I've been able to donate a little bit to Oregon Kelp Alliance and to Oceans Alliance. And so the name being Deep Blue is both like literal, like looking for the blue fruit, but also to talk about another environmental cause. So this, six vineyards went into this. It was about 25% whole cluster, and 1.5 ton capacity fermenters, which are 4 feet by 4 feet. There, come right here. And I do punch downs on this not pump overs. So I'm working the fruit back into the juice with a big stainless steel tool for the most part is how we're doing it. And then after it's fermented, pressed off and aged in older French oak barrels for 10 months before compiling the blend. So again, not looking for woodiness in the wine as much as just using the oak for an aging vessel to help it evolve. 2022 vintage, oh, go ahead, please. Yeah.
So, we'll hear these things like blue fruit, red fruit, black fruit. Every time someone says blue fruit, really the only blue fruit that I know is a blueberry.
Yeah.
What are other blue fruits?
Well, I think of blueberries, I think of blue plums, things like that. Somebody earlier this week told me that it was blue raspberry, and I'm like, that's not a real fruit, but but I'll take it. Like, okay, sure. I know, but they insisted it was very much blue raspberry. I was like, okay, that's cool. But mostly what I'm talking about is like a blueberry kind of, and kind of more like that, blue plum kind of thing. So,
And I ask because,
yeah.
you live in Oregon, you live on the West Coast, we live in the Midwest. And just even on the East Coast, there's so many different varieties of
Yeah.
fruits and vegetables. And I remember the first time I had yellow watermelon, my mind was completely blown.
Yeah.
Because I had never even heard of a yellow watermelon, let alone seen one, and then to eat one, because I don't really care for watermelon
Yeah.
much, but I was like, that changed everything for me.
Yeah.
So I was like, what other blue fruits are around besides
Well,
blueberries?
we
that-
do have huckleberries out in Oregon quite a bit too, and multiple versions of mountain huckleberries, and which are essentially wild blueberries. But I'd lean into a little huckleberry on that too.
Aronia, if you want to.
What's that?
Aronia berries.
I don't know what that is.
There's a lot of them here. There's a lot of Michigan or Michigan.
Huh.
I know mulberry.
So you guys now for the deep blue, there's two here. You have the 2022, which is on the shelf. There's a handful of cases again, and then we'll roll into 2023. What I really liked about this, to be able to show you side by side, is it's so often we have the next vintage when the other is gone. Here you can see people that have been buying one. You can figure out how to discuss the other. Brianne will jump into some of the vintage differences. The other piece that I find really interesting and useful to hold on to with what Brianne's saying about getting into punch downs, it's something that I see a lot with producers around the world. People that are making more and more elegant reds tend to be punching down less and less. It's not a rule that has to happen, but you get to, there's no connection between elegance. I don't mean to quite say it that way. You see people dialing back on it, recognizing that the more you hit the fruit, the more you're going to have tannin in broad strokes. And as you find elegant, really smooth reds, you'll see that somebody had a very delicate hand. And so it's an interesting thing to start to think about because you'll start to be able to dial your palate in. So Benedet's Rouge, which had no punch downs, into 2020, into the deep blue, now you're starting to feel tannin. And so somebody's talking, well, what do you pair it with? How do you drink this? Where do you do it? You have a sense of knowing that there's going to be that tannin in your mouth on one, and on the other one it's not. And so that's just an easy way to guide somebody one way or the other. That said, now the second one you have here is 23, and I'd love to hear about the vintages and differences.
Yeah, they were really different vintages, and that comes through in the wine because the vineyard sourcing and the treatment was very similar between the two vintages. 22, we had a significant freeze that happened after the vines had already started to grow for the year. So there's this first thing that happens in vineyard development when a vineyard's waking up from winter is called bud break. And the buds contain all the potential for everything from the shoots to the leaves to the actual grape clusters contained in a bud. And so when freezes happen after buds have already come out, it's a pretty, it's a time to freak out if you're a grape grower, if you're a winemaker, because that's saying that that all the potential that was contained in those little buds is gone now. So we had a freeze in early April in 2022 after Pinot Noir had started pushing buds, and all of the, not all, but I'd say like 85% of the primary buds in the Willamette Valley were frozen. And so collective industry freak out and lots of meetings and Zoom calls about what we were going to do in the vineyards to compensate for this, or how to deal with secondary shoots, because there are other shoots that come out on the vines, just not the primary ones. And we ended up having a crazy bumper crop that year after all, which was all set on the second set of shoots that came out from the vines. So those shoots came out about 4 weeks after the primaries, which pushes the ripening process and the maturing of the grapes all a month later. So 2022 was pushed up right up against kind of the end of when we're able to keep fruit on the vines before picking them, because I don't know if you spent much time in Oregon, the Pacific Northwest, but when it starts raining in the fall, it doesn't stop again until about May or June, somewhere around there. And it's better to try to pick all your fruit before the rain starts, because there's a lot of dilution that happens after the rain. There's a lot of rot issues that happen on the vineyards, and it's miserable for the pickers. Tractors get stuck, it's muddy, it's awful. So we were up against that rain wall of like letting the fruit hang on as long as possible. But the 22 was ripening during a cooler part of the year than the 23. The 23, we didn't have those issues in the vineyard at all, in the vineyards. So the fruit was getting ripe more in the hotter, like drier part of the growing season, and could be picked more leisurely at when I wanted to pick them, as opposed to being like, oh my God, it's going to start raining on Thursday and it's not going to stop for 6 months, so let's hurry up and pick, which is what happened in 22. I like both versions of the wine, but I think I notice more darker fruit in the 22. I notice more texture. When there's heat during the ripening period, skins get thicker on grapes, and that creates more tannin. So I notice more tannin in the 23 than the 22. They're both about 13% alcohol. I put very accurate alcohols on my labels. So if it says 13, it is 13. But structurally, I feel like the 23 has a bit more like shoulders than the 22. Yes?
On the nose, the 22, like right off the bat, it was just a ton of pencil shavings.
Yeah.
And then the 23 is more of that sour cherry pomegranate fruit. I don't know, but I just got a ton of pencil shavings on 22, which was very interesting.
Oh, that is, yeah.
And I didn't know if it had to do with all the picking.
I don't know. Maybe just a little bit. Yeah, maybe I'm trying to remember whole cluster, because pencil shavings or things like that is something that can come from stem inclusion. Okay. But as I'm recalling, I actually destemmed quite a lot in 22 because when the stems are on the greener side, I try not to include them quite as much. Mm-hmm. So actually, I think there's probably more whole cluster in the 23 than in the 22. I don't know. Do you have a preference, vintage, one vintage to the other, or how are they different to you all?
I like the elegance of the 22. Understated and it's in there, and the 23 is older and more expansive now.
Yeah. Bottle age is something that, well, we'll see with the Johann that we're going to taste next, but it changes the wine really significantly just being in bottle longer too. And I think some of the outgoingness of the 22 with the fruit or with the elegance, we'll see more development of that in the 23 as well, just from being in bottle longer. It can really change things. Yeah.
The 23 right now, it's kind of Burgundian almost. It's
Oh, yeah?
a little bit more of that minerality and the bramble and stuff.
Yeah.
I like it. I mean, this one's a little darker, maybe a little more like somebody who wants a classic US, but this one is more like French style.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I did do more whole cluster in 23 because the fruit was more, ready for it and right for it. And maybe that's kind of some of the structure that you're feeling, or the earthiness too, is some of the stem inclusion. Yeah.
So for the last two, we pulled, you've got the Johann Vineyard 22, which is on the shelf and current. And then, because we always have that question, how does it age? I had two bottles left of the 2016 Johann in our library at the warehouse. So you have the 2022 current and then the 2016 as a way to taste and see what happens.
Is that these two right here that were poured for me too? Okay.
Yeah, and I have to say, just in terms of smelling the 16, I'm really glad I did, because it jumps out as such a through line of the site from one to the next, but you've got development, and super cool. So
Yeah. Yeah, so 2016 was the third vintage that I ever worked with Johann. It was kind of, it's a blast from the past to revisit a wine like that. That's, by 2022, I feel like I had zoomed in on the sections of the vineyard that I wanted to work with the most. 2016 was 667, 777, and Pomard, and then 2022, I started working with another clone called 828. So that's nitpicking about clonal selection, but when you get to know a single vineyard site and single varietal, it's kind of fun to split hairs over things like clonal selection, because they contribute something to the final wine that makes for a complexity. And I kind of look at like clonal selection or use of stems or not using stems or new wood, all as these ways to create kind of complexing factors in the wine. Even spontaneous ferment does that by having it be not just one type of yeast that's fermenting all the way through, but all this like community of yeasts that are fermenting a wine, and I feel like it makes more complex wines. So that's something I'm looking for. God, I hadn't thought about 2016 in a really long time, and I'm really trying to remember the year compared to 2022.
While you think,
Yeah.
while you're put you on the spot, so just to situate, Johann Vineyard is in the Van Duzer corridor, and one of the things I've learned from Brianne, which I think is cool, and you'll hopefully dive more into it, but you've got an incredible amount of wind here. This is how the Willamette Valley basically stays cool, because there's cold air coming off the ocean that comes through the corridor, and that wind is also, from my understanding, desiccates the grapes. So the Van Duzer AVA gets grapes that are smaller. There's a little bit more tannin to juice. If you had a grape the size of a soccer ball, you have a lot of juice and not much skin. When you get a smaller and smaller grape, you get more tannin and less juice. So it is, the wind alone is a really big influence. This is also a vineyard that you all, I'm sure, have seen repeated times, because there's a lot of Johann Vineyard wines that are out, where they've got this incredible diversity of grapes that have been planted, and pioneer in biodynamic and regenerative farming in the Willamette Valley. So very interesting site, site that's really affected by climate that doesn't happen necessarily elsewhere in Oregon. And with that idea of working with it over a couple of years is really interesting to me as to how you've evolved with it.
Yeah, and not the geological events that created the Van Duzer corridor also, it was basically a series of floods that happened in farther east. I can't remember exactly. I know it's the Missoula floods, but I think it was farther east than Montana where the floods came from. But there were, like during the Ice Age when there was a giant lake that kept having ice dams that kept breaking and causing a huge amount of flooding over in the Pacific Northwest. It's what carved out the Columbia River Gorge, and it carved out the Van Duzer corridor, and it completely shaped the whole topography and geology of the region. When those floodwaters came through and glacial debris came through, it forced a pathway out to the ocean, and it eroded out part of the coastal mountain range. So the Willamette Valley sits between the coastal mountain range and the Cascade mountain range. Cascades are much taller. The coastal mountain range like peaks out, I think around 4,000 feet is about the highest place, but it's high enough that it blocks the coastal winds. And if it wasn't for this channel that got carved, they call the gap in the mountains Holmes Gap, it would probably be too hot in the Willamette Valley to even grow Pinot Noir. But because we have that channel that brings in the cold coastal winds every night, it cools it down and allows for Pinot Noir production. But where Johann sits, since it's right on the Van Duzer corridor, there's also all this interesting glacial debris that got deposited in the area, so the soils tend to be different there than almost anywhere else in the Willamette Valley. So it's a ancient seabed, marine sediment. At the base layer, there's all kinds of interesting glacial debris that's on top of it, like erratic basalt boulders. There's some granite boulders that are there. Granite doesn't really exist in the Willamette Valley otherwise. And then all filled in on top of this is volcanic loam from all the volcanic activity in the area. So it's a really diverse site when it comes to soil composition. It's heavily influenced by the winds from the coast, and then it's farmed really interestingly. It's like Damien was saying, it's a certified biodynamic site, regenerative farming, and just really meticulous and well maintained. And I love working with it.
Do you follow any biodynamic practices or procedures in winemaking?
No, not strictly. No, I mean there's no, other than spontaneous ferment, low sulfur. Things like that are part of biodynamic, but like in terms of like rotations on a funnel before wine goes into a barrel or something like that, no, I don't. I don't know, maybe I should. The 22 was 30% whole cluster. Four clones, like I mentioned, went into it. It's aged in about half 500-liter puncheons. So more and more I've been working with larger format barrels, particularly for single varietal and single vineyard wines, because I leave them in barrel for longer periods of time, and I'm trying for a slower evolution, slower oxygen integration, and larger format barrels have thicker staves, and there's just a slower amount of oxygen that gets into them. It was in barrel for 2 years, and then like I mentioned with the 100 Years a Lady, it's just the free run juice. I started doing the free run juice in 2021, so the 2016 does include some press wine in it as well. And 2016 was a warm summer. It was not our hottest summer. It was a really pleasant year to make. I was sitting there remembering what was 2016 like? My son was born in 2017, and everything's been blurry since then. So 2016 was a warm year. The wines from a lot of wines were very ripe, but I try to pick on the earlier sides so that I don't have to do things like acidulate. So I'm really pleased with the way that the structure has held up in the 2016. I have not had this wine in, I don't remember the last time I had this vintage, so I'm stoked to taste it, but I feel like it still has a lot of life in it, and it doesn't seem, I don't know, it doesn't seem too old to me, but yeah.
So you guys, yeah, the second
could see it in the color. There's just a little bit more of like a yeah, tawny edge to it, yeah.
That's why I was saying the Burgundian is because I accidentally tasted them.
Oh, funny. I see. I had a funny thing happen. I don't know, the nose keeps surprising me. I had a funny now thing happen during harvest that year is my destimmer broke halfway through sorting this fruit. And I made a different version of this same wine, and I didn't know which one you had, so it was a surprise. But I had a second bottling of this called Broken Destimmer because it was 100% whole cluster. I segregated the two, and this was the non-broken destimmer. This was the version that happened before this destimmer broke. So. Cool.
Terrific. Well,
Yeah.
thank you. That is the line.
Hey, thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you all for taking the time to taste and ask questions and to drive in and to represent the wines. Like, I appreciate it so much. Thank you. Thank you.
We are going to help clean up. We're not going anywhere. If you've got questions, a couple of people asked to grab a picture. We're very happy to do that. And thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.